My name's Jeremy Barmay. I'm the founding director of the Australian Centre on China in the World, which was established in April 2010 as a result of a Commonwealth Government initiative. I'm delighted to welcome you here tonight to an event that is really one of the major inaugural events of our centre. Last night we had our first formal film screening in this auditorium, and today is our first really major public lecture by the noted American or New York-based photographer, Lois Conner, who is sitting in the front row staring at me, and who will be up here in a moment to speak. The lecture is an introduction really to the exhibition that we will be opening tonight, and we're delighted that Gail Newton of the National Gallery of Australia has kindly and graciously agreed to come and speak this evening at the opening. We're also launching this evening Lois Conner's recent book, which has literally just gone on sale formally yesterday in America, published by Princeton University Architectural Press, called Beijing, Contemporary and Imperial, with which I've had a bit of a hand in that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm first going to just say that I'm delighted that Lois is here with us. If she mumbles or stumbles at all, please forgive her. She got off a plane from New York this morning at 10 o'clock and came straight from teaching at Bard College, and so she might be a little bit frazzled. This is a revived version of the talk that she gave at the opening of Beijing Contemporary and Imperial at the Cleveland Museum of Fine Art in March. And at that time, I was over there, and Lois and I spoke, and I encouraged her to come here because we're holding our first exhibition here, which is Lois's work called Beijing, Unfurling the Landscape, which you'll see in a moment. So this evening's order of events is that Lois will speak now, and then there'll be a short Q&A period, followed by a drinks reception. We'll encourage most of you to go out this door here, although you can also go out the side door and go down to the side of our building. The doors to our tea house will be open. We'd invite you to go into the tea house where drinks will be served, and then you will flow through to what we call the bamboo hall, which is the foyer entrance hall of our building. We've just made up all these names recently. And if you'd like to purchase the name of this building, we'd be happy to discuss the details and also the price. And we shall gather in both the tea house and the bamboo hall for drinks. And then there will be a book launch at about 5:45, and I'll make a few comments then. And Lois, we have about 25 copies of the book for sale, which I brought back from Beijing about a month ago, from New York a couple of months ago. And that will be followed by nibbles and eats and further drinking. And then around 6:30, Gail will kindly say a few words about the work, this exhibition, and this event, and then we shall formally open the new exhibition, the first exhibition in our gallery, which has been curated by our delightful postdoctoral fellow, scholar, curator, writer, Olivier Krischer, who is also here somewhere tonight. This event's being filmed and recorded with the artist's permission, and I would now like to invite Lois Conner, whose details I could give you a long bio of. Lois first went to China over 30 years ago and has had various fellowships, and also she has traveled widely in China from the west to the east, to the south, to the north, has made work there, but she's also made extensive amounts of work in America, Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia. She's published many books, had numerous exhibitions. I just won't go into all the details. We could discuss that all later. So some of the details are in the brochure. As you know, when you go into the exhibition, you will find there are no wall panels. We've decided to do without wall panels. The images are on the walls. There is a brochure that we've produced that explains all of the images, the background to the project, and also Lois's CV. So I encourage you to pick up a copy of that brochure for the details about Lois and the exhibition. I'd also encourage you, when you go into the bamboo hall, to pick up a copy of what we call 10 Scenes of the Center, 中心实景 in Chinese, which is a guide to 10 prominent elements of our new building complex, which was created by a man by the name of Gerald Sito, who is, of course, sitting right up in the very back row, there, second from the end. And Gerald has just joined us from Beijing, and he will be giving a major public lecture on the building and creating architecture for educational spaces on Monday evening, which will be prefaced by a wonderful musical performance by the noted Guzheng performer and composer, and also singer, Wu Fei, who's joined us again from Beijing on a trajectory to Nashville, Tennessee. So I encourage you to take part in those activities as well. But now I'll bring my comments to an end, and I shall ask Lois to please take the stage, and I hope you don't stumble with jet lag. Thank you so much for coming.
Now, are we going to dim the lights a little bit, or?
They need to record you, so this is it.
Oh, this is it. Okay. All right. Now, I thought I'd just pass over a couple of the technical parts. I just want to explain that you'll see in the exhibition my pictures are more this shape. This is the right shape. We just have a lens problem here. So the lens is creating a different shape. I mean, you'll see, not in this picture so much, but in my panoramas you'll see. So I started off with a portrait of me with my camera, and it's not necessarily to show me and that I'm so heroic, but you know, I work in a very deliberate way with a large format camera, and it sort of gives me the excuse to pause and not feel pressured about moving. And I mean, sometimes I can work very quickly, but I also like taking my time. I started off with a more classical 8x10 shape, which is the European sort of painting proportion, and made a lot of portraits of trees. This portrait I made after I read Kafka's Metamorphosis. I mean, I think my early pictures of trees were mostly me projecting my history onto the landscape. This is in California when I started to use the panoramic shape, and I really love Jackson Pollock, and so I was thinking about his work when I saw this moss-covered forest off the coast of California. It was when I went to Louisiana in '83 to teach that I started thinking about the Chinese landscape. This is Louisiana. This is off Route 10 near Baton Rouge. And the reason I started thinking about it is because I started using this camera, which is a 7x17 banquet camera. I had studied painting, Chinese painting from the Ming Dynasty. When I was a student at Yale, I had to take several electives, and each elective I took was in art history, and I figured Chinese painting from the Ming Dynasty was something I absolutely knew nothing about. And I had the opportunity to see this particular painting, which is always in my mind, at the Met, and to hold it. And it was just, I mean, so fresh, and you know, I had a detail. Then I wrote my paper on Hangzhou, and I fell in love with this shape, and I started thinking of what the 19th century photographers used that was similar, and there was the 717, 1220, and 820 banquet camera, and they were used for making pictures of people at banquets. So I found an old one, and I fixed it up, and my father built me holders. And I wrote a proposal to the Guggenheim Foundation, never thinking I would get it immediately, but I did. In 1984, I went to China. I was thinking about how not only I was thinking about someplace very specific, about the Guilin landscape, which is here, and I wondered if the elongated format before I left came about because of the language or the landscape. And it was actually the landscape, the language, because the pictures came much later to be added along to the calligraphy. So I thought, I went for 8 months, my first trip, and I thought I'd spend the whole time in this area where painters, poets, and writers have been going for 2,000 years. And I think I could have stayed there the whole time. It was just so completely magical and also difficult, but, and it rained a lot. But that's what made, you know, the Bayun, that's what painters and writers came to see as the magic. So after it rains, there'll be white clouds floating. But I thought even with the very industrialized apartment buildings and landscapes that were growing up around the mountains in the Guilin area. I thought that it was hard for me to imagine what China was unless I really saw more of it. And I thought I would be better at describing the place that I fell in love with if I traveled. So I started to travel. This is still Guilin, but it's very hard for me to edit it down to even 5 pictures because I've spent a good deal of my life there photographing. But these are all early pictures. I'm really trying to keep chronological on some level. So I made this little tour that I designed for myself around China. I think I went to 5 or 6 different cities, but at different parts of China. This is in Shanghai in '84, in Hangzhou that same year. When I was making this picture, just to show you how, I'm not a documentary photographer. If I was, I would use a 35mm camera or a handheld camera. But photography, even with a handheld camera, is fiction. It's an abstraction from the world. You're grabbing one part of it. 350 people were behind me when I was making this picture. But it looks so quiet and serene. I mean, photography for me is almost like a performance because it doesn't matter whether I'm in New York or I'm in China or, wherever I am. Maybe Australia, there are less people here. But I do gather a crowd because I'm carrying that big camera and I'm under a focusing cloth and I look like a different animal. I traveled to Huangshan and I climbed up with that big camera, going very slowly. And much to my disappointment, Ronald Reagan was elected president while I was climbing the day I made that picture. I know, all those steps, and I'm like, oh no. Somebody told me, this is way before iPhones and, internet availability. But this short trip, it was maybe 6 weeks long, really told me a lot about what I was looking at, and it made me realize that I knew nothing. Even spending, 6 weeks in Guilin before I went on this trip, I knew very little. This is Kunming, or near Kunming. So I was in Kunming, Dali, Shanghai, I did a few places. So just to give you an idea that where I was going. This is very early pictures from that first year and also from a few years that followed. I was in Beijing. I guess I finally ended up being there in November of that year. This is Yiheyuan. And I'm going to talk about the pictures a little bit more as I move in further. This is just background to the Beijing contemporary imperial work that I want to show. I thought actually when I originally came that most of my pictures would be verticals, not only of the mountains, but of trees. But then it didn't happen that way, because most of the trees were cut down during the Cultural Revolution, so there were only new trees. This is Beihai-yuan. I started out with the Imperial because I felt it was something that I could begin to understand through reading history, and it was readily available. My Chinese was minimal, and not that it's so great right now, but I felt it was a good beginning to start there. And I'm still kind of obsessed with the Imperial, and I've searched it out all over China, both alone and with Jeremy. The reason I love this form is, maybe you can't see it here because it's so squat, but the narrative is elongated. In a less panoramic frame, you don't have as long of a narrative and as long of a space to tell a story. Those undulating forms, maybe they don't connect in the same way in a different shape frame. So the camera does dictate what I look at. This is also still Beihai. I fell in love with Beihai. Still am in love with Beihai. And I feel like even these last few pictures of the early years in Beijing kind of describe the things that I continue to be interested in. The Imperial and the ruined and the rebuilt. This is early. This is the northeast wall of the Forbidden City. And you can see that it's looking a little scrappy there, but I kind of liked it like that. There are a lot of people, you know, milling around and just living and fishing and enjoying life, it looks to me. And in those early days, I'd rush, if I was going to the Forbidden City, I'd rush to this area, this garden, which I love, and so I could be there without the sort of crush of people. So quiet and serene back then, huh? The Qing tombs. So I was out on the street, and I think even in '84 I was already starting to go around by bicycle, because I tried to be on the bus with my equipment. And I mean, as many of you know, back then it was, I mean, even to get your person on there was difficult, but to get on there with a lot of equipment, it wouldn't be attached to you anymore. It'd be all these different places, and then the buses would just travel around places I didn't want to go. So, and also, again, the Chinese wasn't that good, but I'm a visual artist, so I can see signs, and I never knew where I wanted to stop. I stopped where I felt like, the pulse was beating a little bit harder. And, often it was in places like this on the street. No place in particular, but maybe very particular for me, to feel that flux of life. The hutongs the hutongs, everybody knows what a hutong is. The alleyways in Beijing have always been a fascinating place for me, because they just seem like a maze. You go down, you think you're going down a route that's going to take you straight down, and then there's all these meandering little side hutongs and another side hutong, and it's completely mysterious and wonderful. And I also was fascinated with the layers of history that the landscape provided in the hutongs and the areas surrounding the hutongs. Perhaps several centuries in one house, when you see things built one on top of the other, on top of the other. And because of the quality of description of my large format negative, you can really see all that much better when you make an enlargement. This is, I was standing on top of one of those very interesting roofs, trying not to fall through. So I could see inside the hutongs, because, when you're walking down the street, you're only on the outside. And when you're on the inside, it's very cramped in some of these places that have been inhabited by several families, and not just the original family from the Cultural Revolution times. So again, another one of my sort of obsessions or themes or interest is this transformation of Beijing. I mean, when I first went there, the city's streets were pretty open and not much new building. This is, I think, 88, 89 it started. And then for one semester I lived at Beijing University and photographed the buildings there. And I lived at Shaoyuan, and it's the first place I really photographed lotus. You know, I thought they were beautiful before, but when I started to photograph them, I just fell in love with them. And this is from a very small lake. And again, you know, the camera can make it larger, just, you know, if you point the camera down, or, you know, you're already distorting it, making it larger. So after 1998, I met Jeremy in 1996, and we decided to meet in Beijing in 1998 and start working on a mutual interest of ours, Yuanmingyuan. But it's also, he introduced me to a lot of people that were very helpful to me and were interested also in what I was trying to do with Beijing. And I would have never had this kind of access to the area behind Mao's portrait with that camera. I was there for maybe an hour, and that's Sangye. It got me permission. And of course, I was very disappointed the day that I went. It was very hazy, and the time of day, the light was right into the camera lens when it did come through. But I thought, well, I mean, it's much better for that illusion of, you know, that mirage, or my idea of what Beijing was, you know, that kind of magical place. This was when it was under construction for the 50th anniversary. And because of where I was, I mean, really, literally, the sun was coming right in, and when the clouds cleared, you know, just for that brief moment, this lion was illuminated. But I love all that construction and, you know, the machines and the numbers of people that camera can describe all at once. So my interest are the streets, the hutongs, trying to describe the everyday and, you know, the hidden. This is the military museum. Trying to understand not only what China was, but specifically what Beijing was. And, you know, I'm thinking about maybe the work of Versailles, or Versailles in Paris and Atget in Paris, and how they spent their lives photographing every part of something that was disappearing. I mean, one day I'd be riding my bike by a place and it would be full of buildings, and the next day, you know, one remained. But, you know, the camera, this particular camera, this format, allows me to sort of have a conversation about the landscape and the people that live there, you know, that little conversation on the corner, and the old and the new, as a kind of collage. My short story, maybe my little Balzac. I'm kind of obsessed with the military museum. I only included 2 pictures, though. I took a few out. I was invited by the Photographers Association, I think in 1999, maybe it was 2000, to, you know, there was 80 photographers photographing Beijing for the 50th anniversary, or the 50th, around the 50th anniversary year. I can't remember exactly what the real occasion was. I mean, it was around that time. And so they asked each of us what we wanted to photograph, and one of the places I wanted to photograph was inside the military museum. And they gave me permission, and I was there for about an hour and a half, and they decided that was enough. I mean, they didn't realize I was going to be in there with that camera, but I took a lot of pictures. I mean, because I'd been there before, I kind of had an idea. And you know, here it is. The painting is the background. I mean, it doesn't look real, but at the same time, it almost looks real, and the plane's real. And in color, I have pictures of it in color. It's not the same. That merging of the worlds is much more fluent, I think, in black and white. So this is a crazy time of, this is 1998. Construction everywhere, and especially, this is Wangfujing. Was a really huge construction site, day and night working. And I had 6 months, a sabbatical from teaching, and I spent it there. And I was really excited, and people brought me more film. I think I had 500 sheets of film, and I had, my father sent me film, and another friend of mine brought me film. But unfortunately, I think you can see it in this picture. All my film had really deep X-rays when I got back from leaving New York, but the film that was sent to me didn't have it. And now I can fix those lines. I mean, I can see it on the screen here. I think you can see it projected a little bit. But they were really very dramatic, especially in the Lotus pictures, which I was so excited about. You can really see it. It's so noticeable when you have that even tone. But now, with the technology the way it is, I can fix it. I just want you to know everything doesn't go so smoothly. This is Tiananmen. You can see Tiananmen lit up. I think I was there for about an hour, and then they discovered me and asked me to leave. That's about it's a good amount of time. I think my exposure is about 40 minutes, so it's pretty happy. I mean, at the same time I'm photographing Beijing and the transformation of Beijing and going back to the Imperial, I'm working very closely with Jeremy on Yuanmingyuan. And he's also suggesting things about the city. And I'm going to show you that in a second, but I wanted to separate them somehow so I could talk about it a little bit more. I love here, this building I was also pretty crazy about, the CCTV. And I watched it from a very flat construction site till it was finished, and photographed it when the hotel burnt from the firecrackers. Here I like how it's materializing out of the landscape. But I had a couple places in Beijing I used to just, every day when I got up, I would maybe go to my 5 favorite places and then go to several more. And when the city got really oppressive, I would go photograph Lotus. So, I mean, another thing I could show you is like 50 pictures of the CCTV. So in maybe 1995, I started trying to figure out another way to photograph cities, not only in Beijing and Shanghai, but in New York and the other places I worked. And I felt that photographing the city and the offices where we work and how we sort of imbibe part of the landscape, how we borrow the landscape, almost without knowing it. I like here how it's broken up into these different frames, almost, multi-panel, that you can sort of absorb the city little by little, or not at all, if you're staring at the screen. I mean, the desk always seemed to face away from the windows. Another construction site that I had very good access to, and I fell in love with, is IMP's Bank of China that Gerald worked on. And this is one of the many pictures. I'm going to show a few more later, but I love being there. Gerald, did you recognize it? What I love also about this camera is that even when I'm pointing it at people, they don't know they're being photographed, because I can say, well, I'm photographing the building. And I mean, it's not just in China, it's everybody thinks that they just disappear, or I'm not pointing it at them. So it's a way of being very mischievous to get what you want. And you're just praying that the people on the left are not going to move and out of the frame. So over the years, I've come to know a lot of people, and they would suggest places to photograph, or suggest, oh, you know, that noisy construction site outside my window, can you come document it, because it's going to be gone. They're just working like mad around the clock. This is Boeing's office in Beijing. I mean, they are obsessed with the Imperial, right? It's no longer there. It was just a brief moment. We had a little bit of Egypt. It's another building that I absolutely loved under construction. When it was finished, it was less interesting, although it still had that shell of the unfinished. This is the National Stadium, which you all know, the bird's nest. I spent a lot of time in the Hutongs and the Sihuyuans trying to photograph before many of them disappeared. This one's no longer there. I think that the tearing down of things is almost as interesting as the building up. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. I have to keep throwing a few of the offices in there because I think they're relevant. You know, the way I put the picture together and maybe the meaning that I'm trying to extract. All the landscape in this photograph is, and even the person in it, are shadows and reflections. They're not the real tangible thing. So it's like triple borrowing. It's the only drive-in in China. I mean, at the time, maybe there are more now. They were showing Kung Fu Panda. My nod to Sugimoto's theaters. And my nod to Robert Frank, I don't know if any of you know. Yes, no. But I mean, it was there. It was amazing. And, you know, down in the Hutongs, fancy cars that need to be covered up. And beautiful light. And that was my Gamian Hutong, where I used to stay. So it's even more special because it's hardly there either. And here you really can see that palimpsest, that sort of collage of the old and the new and the layering. And now none of it's there. It's a 4-lane highway. I know I should be talking more specifically about the pictures, but I think I'm going to in just a minute. I mean, it's one reason why I'm a photographer, so I don't have to talk. This is a picture that Jeremy talks about a lot in the book, and I'm not going to repeat anything he says, but I want to talk maybe a little bit about making the picture, because sometimes I see something and I think, oh my God, I have to photograph that, but how am I going to get there? This is a rooftop. It was a rooftop of a place called the World Fantasy Hotel. And somehow I convinced the manager to let me go up on the roof. And when he finally agreed, he said, you know, there's no inside stairwell. You have to go up those rebars that are on the outside. So it was 3 stories up, and these little rebars like this, just like really this long. And, you know, maybe I don't even trust them if I'm in my own country, but in China I was like, but I did, because it was, you know, all these stars unfurling on the, you know, across the rooftop. How could I resist? And, you know, it took me a couple trips up, and I didn't look down, and just, it was totally worth it. And so much so that I went back to photograph 2 nights later, because I wanted to be there at night. And I drug a friend of mine with me the second time, so it was less scary, but still scary because it was at night up the rebars. And I think on a rooftop, it's something very different for me. And I've in New York, I often felt like it was going on vacation to another exotic place. You know, maybe I couldn't go to Hawaii or, you know, I don't know, Nova Scotia, but I could go on a roof, and it seemed like a completely different space in the same city, because you can change where the horizon line is. I mean, not that you can't, no matter where you are, but you didn't have to deal with the cars, the street. The roof became the street. And then the landscape, you could pull the landscape in a different way and have it be part of the roof, this new landscape that you're building. And for me, it's the population is something that's really a technical problem for me to photograph. I mean, I can photograph a lot of people on the street, but they're going to be moving, and maybe I can't be as quick. I mean, I've gotten better at it, but I like seeing that flux and that flow of life, and so trying to find different ways to describe it. This is during the time of the 50th anniversary. There were a lot of people on the streets near Tiananmen. It's not so far away, Chang'an. Okay, so now this looks like another picture of the stadium, but it's a layering of 3 posters. And the only thing that's real in the picture are the bags of cement. I think that print is in the exhibition, yeah. It is, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because the street really starts to look real. The street that's sort of vertical in the picture, and then you start looking at it and you can see the lines of ink from the printing of the poster. But, you know, because I'm obsessed with the building, I had to make it, and, you know, it's all part of it, my collage. I was making this picture, and the light was so beautiful, and I was really excited, and I was kind of waiting for something to happen, and then all of a sudden the men came back from lunch, and they were going up the stairs, but, you know, I was kind of in between. The film holders were lying on the ground somewhere, and the lens was open, and so I had to quickly shut the lens, figure out the exposure, put the holder in, pull the slide. And I didn't get them sort of, you know, it should have been a quicker shutter speed maybe, but in the end, I think I like it with them moving. And I definitely like it better than the picture I made without them. Cannot find the negative, though. It would seem with big negatives you would never lose them, but you still, you know, lose track of them. This is from the World Trade Center on Chang'an-Dikche, very early. Not that early. I mean, you can tell it's a while ago because of the computers. And also the Soho buildings are not as numerous as later. So you can, you know, maybe if I hadn't photographed so much bamboo, I wouldn't be so interested in how those slats of the Venetian blinds looked as they opened up onto the landscape. I call them the three tombs. This is Zaha Hadid's Galaxy building. It was so beautiful as a construction site. It's absolutely gorgeous. And then after this, it was covered with a, you know, white skin and never quite as dramatically beautiful and interesting and intriguing. Although the interior proves to be a lot more interesting than the exterior. But I got permission to photograph there, and I'm very excited about the pictures I made. One of the things I was also so amazed by is how a park or a forest could go up almost overnight. And this is the Olympic Park under construction. I was there maybe 2 days before and there were no trees at all. Even the trees and the things that look like buildings in the background in the middle of the frame are giant, larger trees and lean-tos, but they look like buildings. This is when they were making the National Theater. This is downtown. I mean, most of you read Chinese, so I'm not going to tell you what it says, but for me, what was, you know, these construction sites offered so much. You know, they were taking things down, destroying or completely removing, however you want to look at it, neighborhoods. But it provided also a slate for people to express themselves on. I mean, you know, the merchants to, you know, flog their skills, and the kids to do their anatomically correct drawings and, you know, sort of storyboards. And it just seemed, you know, this wonderful slate, another kind of reflection of, you know, the time. This is again the Bank of China under construction. I mean, Gerald, was it always like that? Those few days, it must have been always magical when you walked in there. Or it was just that morning we walked in, and it was like that. It was like I was in a giant spider web. And, you know, it was, you know, you might think that light is the same again, and probably if you went back the next day, they'd have constructed something else that would have blocked something, or the sun wouldn't have been coming in. So you just have to take that opportunity. This is the same day. But these negatives are all just sort of recently recovered because they were destroyed by X-rays. This one's in the exhibition. And maybe it makes me think of At J and that kind of surreal light that he was photographing in the early morning. This is, of course, early morning light too, and how it transforms. I went to Tiananmen to photograph. I came over for 2 weeks to photograph for the 50th anniversary of the People's Republic of China because I knew I could get onto the square with my big camera, and I wanted to make portraits. And I made a lot of portraits, but I also went at night to photograph that first night when they let you on the square. And that's a giant key float with the new city. And I was right by a police barrier, and they said, oh, well, you can't photograph here. And I said, thank God, my Chinese was a little bit better. And I said, well, why not? And they said, oh, well, they couldn't think of a reason. They just told me to hurry up. But I was just hoping they didn't see the chairs with the coats folded over them as I saw them. You know, they seemed to be people praying rather than folded coats. I could have shown you a lot of fireworks too. These are sort of vagabond fireworks on the outside of Beijing. One New Year's Eve when it was, I know when it was, 2000. Was it 2000? Yeah, I think so. It's 20 below zero. First couple of pictures I took, each 20 to 30 minute exposures. First couple, the lens didn't open. Because you can hear it click open and click close, but I had a hat on and I was so cold, but I'm always so nervous, so I went around to the lens just to peek in, because what difference does it make if it's 20 minutes? You know, the lens can't really see me for a second. I would disappear. And then I noticed it's not open. So, you know, and like an hour wasted, freezing. And I just kept working. This is towards the very end. I mean, it was so much fun. It was like being in a war zone, at a shooting range, I don't know, in an ice box, all these things all at the same time, and it's thrilling. It's, you know, the smell of the gunpowder and sulfur, and, you know, on the street it was wilder, but here I was by a series of apartment buildings, and people were throwing firecrackers out the apartment buildings. And so, I mean, I never knew what was going to happen. You know, when to stop or stop the exposure was just determined by how many firecrackers were going off and guessing. This is the National Stadium. And I think in the last one in that one. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Yuanmingyuan, but not as a scholar, as a photographer. And does everybody know about Yuanmingyuan? Mostly everybody. Anyway, I'm going to read you a few things. But first, I'm going to show you a map. And I'm going to show you a painting from 1924, which is the oldest. It's after the Yuanmingyuan was destroyed in, I know exactly when. I don't know why. I'm like, you know, this is a jet lag. You're not allowed to judge me for this. Okay. Yuanmingyuan was constructed between 1690 and 1860. 1860, it was destroyed by the Allied forces, the British and the French, and that's the first time. The destruction was in retaliation for the execution of, I think, some British soldiers. But first they robbed it and then they sacked it. They robbed it and then they burnt it. And so the remains are sometimes invisible, because over the years, I mean, I should really start over again. Okay. So This is 1988, I made this photograph, and I was living at Beijing University, and I just started to go there because I heard that it was close by, and it just seemed so incredible. And it also, I had worked at, in Europe. I worked for the UN, and I traveled often, every chance I could get, to all the places that I always dreamed of. And a lot of those were in Italy. And I thought, well, here I am looking at something that looks Italian in the middle of, you know, China. And it turns out that this is part of the European ruins that were designed by, they were commissioned by Qianlong, and the Jesuit priest built them. Castiglione probably designed that little piece we're looking at. And Jeremy can correct me if I'm wrong. You know, I'm very romantic about all this. But this is also when I first met Jeremy in 1996, and he told me that he was working on exploring this place and writing about it. And I went and I gave him this photograph. And we decided to meet in 1998 and photograph the gardens together. I really didn't know what to expect. I know he was a world-famous cultural historian, and I was rather nervous, but it was so much fun. I mean, it's really been completely fascinating for me because he would read to me and describe what we were looking at, and sometimes it would be impossible to discern anything. But it would be the beginning of something, and I would go back, or we would go back, and sometimes I could really, I mean, there is something underneath there. And I love the mystery of this picture because you really don't know. You can see some of the rocks, the rockery in it. I think this is, I should look back in the notes, but I think that this is the Tan Tan Dan Dan ruin. Is it? Yeah, I think it is. But I put it here because I wanted to start with, you know, we were there and they were taking down some of the structures from the Cultural Revolution when people, you know, built houses there. And we walked through all sorts of rubble and muck and explored like we were from the 19th century, you know. Of course, Jeremy had maps and he was very methodical, and but it was we both discovered things together, and he read poetry to me and described what we were looking at, and quoted Mao, and I mean I have like, this is the first trip we did together. He made notes that have footnotes, notes with footnotes. It's really pretty good. And you know, I've never had the opportunity to work with anybody like that, so it really kind of changed. It encouraged me to sort of keep going and go back, even obviously when he wasn't there, and he would still advise me from afar. So. In some ways, the Beijing book is just the beginning of showing that work, because there's a lot of it. We've been working together for a long time. But I want to just read you something he wrote about Yuanmingyuan. So this is early on, because he can describe it so much better than I can, but he probably can also read it better than I can. Following a long tradition of garden design and imperial practice, the construction and landscaping of the garden palaces drew on elements of ancient political convention, as well as poetic imagination and fantasy, on garden and scenic tropes, cultural myth, and imaginative play. As the Garden of Perfect Brightness expanded, it eventually comprised 3 interconnected gardens that we saw in the very beginning. Themes taken from poetry, myth, and stories inspired by the design of the new tableau and vistas on the grounds, resulting in what the architectural historian Charles Moore called one of the world's great historical theme parks, a museum of travel that he compared to the Roman Emperor Hadrian's villa at Tivoli and the happiest kingdom of them all, Disneyland. I never felt we were in Disneyland. But some of the other places we went to that there's a complete, I don't think it's really complete. We went to some place just outside of Beijing that recreated Yuanmingyuan. That felt like Disneyland. Yeah, Anping. And I loved it because you could see really the seams of the building. It was just kind of thrown together. And okay, let me just see. I do have some notes. I will read something else. I think my work has always been about the idea of landscape as culture. I'm interested in the historical, but I'm interested in spinning a modern tale from it with that history in mind. There's a great quote, I don't know who said it, "Study the past, it contains the present." Okay, so this is the Buddha city, Shiweicheng. I'm not going to even try to say everything in the right tones. I went back to, there are a lot of pictures of that because you can't even see it here, but I know it's there, and I feel like it sort of tells something about the magic of the city, of that particular, the Buddha city, I think, had something like 1,000 Buddhas contained in this small building. And, you know, that raking magical light, I think, had something to do with it. This was actually on the first day we went out photographing. And there in the middle of this field are Jeff Koons sculptures. And, you know, the wonderful structures on the left in the garden holding up the garden are part of the ruins of, I don't know what building. Here we are. Tianran Tuhua, Nature's Picture, probably from that. And people are still living in those buildings. Those buildings aren't there anymore. They were later torn down. This is the remains of the rockery at the studio of paired herons, inspired by Wuxi's Garden of Resident Delight. This is Tantandandan, and I went there. It's the Goldfish Pavilion, the Pavilion of Rippling Waves. Once Jeremy pointed it out to me, I kept going back to certain places over and over again just because they seemed to be just crazy that it could be a goldfish pond. It just, you know, it was beautiful as a pile of rocks, but hard to imagine. And this was one year when it was Chinese New Year's, and then there was nobody chasing me away because this part of the park wasn't open. And, you know, it was really blocked off and kind of maybe somewhat secretive about, you know, doing the excavation and renovation and of that part, or of the park at all. So this is a not necessarily consecutive years, but anyway, the same bit of rockery put together as the goldfish pond. And I'm still photographing it. I feel like I've gotten it, but I haven't really, you know, there's someday that I'll be finished, but it's not yet. This is Shiweicheng again, the Buddha Wall, Buddha City. Now our names are carved on that wall. It also felt like when I was out there, I mean, I just often just go out there when I've been turned away by 10 people, and you know, when I was photographing in the city, people would say, oh, well, you know, you can't photograph here, you can't do this. Why don't you go out to the Great Wall and photograph? This is just garbage here. You know, this is the kind of comments I get. And I can take it, that's all right. I mean, it's not like I don't hear it in New York. Nobody ever tells me to go photograph the Great Wall when I'm in New York, but anyway, when I went out to Yuanmingyuan, it became one of my favorite places, my Central Park. It seemed like a completely different world there. And not only was the air cleaner, but it was quieter, and there was real nature and history. You know, even when I didn't know exactly what I was looking at, I had this history already with Jeremy, you know, sort of feeding my imagination. This is near Switzerland, and it's the Lion's Grove, and it's Qianlong's writing on there, and I think he's writing about Peach Blossom Spring, a poem about Peach Blossom Spring. I maybe photographed this particular scene 20 times. I mean, I went there numerous times, and I photographed it maybe 20 times. We photographed it first together, and then I kept going back because, you know, I can't even describe exactly what I'm looking for, but I guess it's something where everything comes together, and it's complete unto its own without me, you know, even describing exactly what it is. Not only did I travel all around Yuanmingyuan with Jeremy and through lots of Beijing, but we traveled to Hangzhou together and to many other parts of China where things related to Yuanmingyuan, and even when they didn't, they seemed to. This is Sudi Chunqiao, and it's after a scene in Hangzhou. Spring Dawn at Su Embankment. It's one of the 10 scenes. Not one of the 10 scenes here, but one of the... It was a once picturesque spot that included a large lake, a 9-arch bridge, and groves of trees. And when I was there with Jeremy, he reminded me that I had seen that in Hangzhou, because I'd already been photographing in Hangzhou quite a bit. And because of that, you know, I could see it. I mean, I don't know whether you can see it if you've been there, but it becomes that to me. I mean, of course, on this, at that spot, you would have water, you'd be surrounded by water, but they were just bringing it back. It's been freshly cleared. This is view of the distant seas, and Jeremy got permission for us to photograph there at night, and it was in the winter, and it was also, 20 below zero is my go-to point, 20 below zero Fahrenheit. Celsius, your degrees, it's even colder. Anyway, my exposures, there wasn't much light there. I mean, this is before they put any light in at all. So the exposure was about an hour long, and I was really afraid that there wouldn't be any illumination on the front of the ruins. So I had Jeremy walk through with a flashlight and, you know, shine it on the bottom of the ruins. And sometimes he was just swinging the light, and so when he's swinging the light and not pointing it, you can see his path. So this is the Nautilus, Hall of Distant Seas, Haiyantang. And the 12 sculptures of that used to be at this fountain that have become very well known, most recently by Ai Weiwei, used to sit on the left. Oh, I can see if I can do right around there. There were 12 heads of, you know, the animals. So these are the Ai Weiwei sculptures in New York by Central before they were uncovered. I photographed them uncovered too, but I I kind of like that one. So bits and pieces of Yuanmingyuan end up being not only all over Beijing, but all over China, but all over the world. And, you know, it's been one of my quests to sort of find them, along with Jeremy. This is one in No Name Lake in Beida, the fish. And I photographed it in the winter too. I don't think I made that good of a photograph, but it was incredible to see it sort of encased in ice. But, you know, things change all the time. I didn't have those wonderfully wrapped white trees to sort of top the picture. This is at the Italian embassy. They're beautiful. They're absolutely magical. I mean, like when you see that and then you go back out to Yuanmingyuan, and then you can really start imagining, you know, along with that drawing and the etchings and all the other things that are available, just how incredible it was. There's just chiseling in the snow. This particular snow, I broke my arm that day. I only lost one day of work, don't worry. This is Suntan Yenyue, moon reflected in 3 ponds. It's one of the 10 scenes in Hangzhou. And I had a, you know, most of the lamps have been long gone, and it's just these 3 little breasts sticking up in the out of the water when there is water. But I thought they were more beautiful in the snow. And I mean, I've photographed it. I don't know. Let me see if I brought. No, I didn't bring any more. Yeah, I photographed that a lot. This is Fuhai. That particular day, that snowy day, I was just ready to go down to Hangzhou because it was starting to get cold. I'm going to go photograph dead lotus. And I thought, oh, snow, I better stay. And so Jeremy went up with me that day, and we photographed all day. It was unbelievable. It was so beautiful. And my feet, my shoes were, I guess, not really good shoes, and they had holes in them, and my feet got all wet. And so Jeremy somehow mentioned that he had 2 pairs of socks on, and his feet were really dry. And I said, okay, give me 1 pair of those socks. So we went to have tea, and he gave me 1 pair of the socks, rubbed my feet. He claims he didn't, but he did. I was completely frozen. I couldn't concentrate. I just couldn't concentrate on anything. And then the futai at the restaurant gave me little plastic bags, and I put them between the socks and the shoes. Otherwise, the new socks are just going to get wet. And we happily photographed all day, and I managed not to fall down with the camera, and you know, because it was icy and snowy, and you know, as well as being magical. And then that night, some friends of mine invited us to go see the North Korean opera, and we all went, and it was pretty amazing. And I still had on those shoes with the plastic bags in them. And we came out, and all the ice and snow that had melted had frozen up again. And I slipped on the black ice, and Gerald was there. Everybody yelled "black ice" in every language but mine. And I fell, and then, you know, I said, oh, you know, I think I broke my arm. And everybody just, no, Gerald was the only one that believed me. So they took me to the hospital, and, you know, it wasn't that dramatic. I mean, you've got a cast on, and I just had to stop people passing by when I was photographing because I could do everything but put the film holder in the camera because I broke my left arm. I needed the left arm to sort of steady the camera, and because the cast was at my fingers, I couldn't really steady it in the right way. But, you know, I got to know a few more people. Nobody ever turned me down for that. I mean, I've photographed this particular bridge and the cherry blossoms and, you know, every time of the year. But I think it's somehow it comes together in this particular photograph. These are the Scholar Rocks at the depth of Peach Blossom Spring. You know, when I studied, I never knew that Scholar Rocks could actually be in the landscape. I always thought that they were the things brought inside so you could reimagine the landscape. They're really called Scholar Rocks, yeah. I mean, I've always collected rocks, so I started collecting rocks that look like this, but much smaller. And this is the line at the maze that was designed by the Jesuits, the European palaces. Marin was there. Where are you? You were there when I made that picture. Wandering around the maze, maybe. I think that's what you guys were doing. This Imperial residencies used to be all the way around this lake. This was probably in 1998 that we made this. And the lake was surrounded by 9 islands representing the 9 realms, the world under the sway of the Chinese civilization. I love it when they were excavating the old canals, and you know, so they could fill them up again. And it seems to me that you could imagine what it was like for them to be building them from scratch. It was originally it was just marshlands. It was flat, so every bit of the landscape was built up. All the mountains, I mean, not really mountains, but hills, and everything was dug and built up. These are the dragon's spouts at Fenghu Shengjing, magical realm of the square gourd, a temple dedicated to the god of the seas. These are bits and pieces of the European ruins. And this is one of the last ruins that was uncovered. And the first time Jeremy and I went there, it was a boiler factory. And it was completely encased. It was really quite remarkable that this Buddhist temple was inside this boiler factory. And when he first told me, I kind of, you know, yeah, of course it is. And then finally we got to go inside. The first time we were there, we photographed the wrong signs outside. And then the second time we were there, I mean, it was the end of the day. And then we went back and we came inside. And, you know, I have pictures of it completely uncovered, but I just wanted to show you this one. And that one where it looks like maybe a landscape from the Civil War. This is also the Buddhist temple. This is Wind in the Lotus at the distillery. I love the names of the place. Even the names just alone can conjure up a world, right? So the last, and I'm probably running out of time anyway, are the Lotus pictures, and I'm just going to run through a few of them and say a few things. And it's one of my sort of, again, my obsessions. My obsessions run from buildings and rooftops to Lotus. And I was in Hangzhou, and I was there for maybe 6 weeks, and I think it rained every day. And I thought, well, I mean, I didn't know in the beginning it was going to rain every day, but I thought, well, what am I going to photograph? Because in rain, if you're photographing a distant landscape, it can be interesting if there's actually something you can see that's tangible. But I felt like I wanted to photograph something closer. And so, because it's so well known for the lotus, I started photographing the lotus close up. And I was fascinated with the way that, you know, with no sun at all, no shadows, it completely, you know, where the line begins and the shadow starts is exactly invisible. So it becomes this really easy kind of fictional place, like a drawing. I can do my 100 pictures of lotus, but it won't be. So I just want to show you a range of, you know, the first couple are all Hangzhou. This is Hangzhou this summer. I just want to be inside there. I just love the lotus. And this is Yuanmingyuan, and over the years they started to plant different kinds of lotus and more reeds and other things that used to grow there. And so they become longer and longer pictures. I feel like, you know, the one frame couldn't contain what I wanted to describe. And I felt like it all needed to be together because I needed to describe that lusciousness and that kind of endlessness of it. And I wanted to be enveloped by it. There are just a few, just hang in there. This is a snow, ice. I call them my chalk lotus. They look like drawings under the water. I remember this particular day that there was a light frost, and Jeremy and I were out photographing, and I think at that day he said he limited me to like 6 lotus a day. Photograph lotus on your own time. But he allowed me that one. That was near the Shizelin, and they had been lotus that had been hit by frost. So if you see it close up, it looks pretty great. This is a more recent lotus. And that's the last one. It ends with the universe. Okay, any questions or? I didn't put you all to sleep, did I? I'm really sorry.